If you like what you're hearing, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/mtgbooks. Thank you. Chapter 14. Prize. The pile of discarded scrolls spilled off the table and covered the floor. A good third of the bookshelves were empty. Urza slumped over the latest treatise, head propped on one hand. He couldn't read anymore. For 16 hours straight, he'd labored in this obscure annex where some past chamberlain had stored all the books he found too old or too esoteric for the palace's main collection. The technical information he gleaned from the scrolls was straightforward enough. The tiny machines were highly resistant to normal magical influence because it was artificial. Flowstone existed on the molecular level. In order to survive programming and recombination, flowstone molecules were extremely well balanced harmonically and therefore resistant to any sort of energy input. In a natural substance, wood, for example, matter was balanced statically. At rest, under normal conditions, wood was wood. Add heat to it and its balance broke down. Burning resulted. No fire in the world could burn flowstone, because adding heat to the harmonically stable substance had no effect. Trying to ignite flowstone was like trying to boil an ocean by adding a tea kettle full of hot water. The secret of flowstone manipulation lay in focusing magic or mental energy on individual molecules of the stuff. Urza imagined it this way. Start with a tall brick tower, solid and level. A man could not topple the tower simply by shoving against it or even by battering it with a sledgehammer. But with a chisel and mallet, he could loosen bricks around the base of the tower. When the foundation became unstable, the tower could be toppled with a single finger. The real skill was in trying to make the resulting rubble into something useful. Evankars were given this psionic ability by the Phyrexians during their physical metamorphosis. Unaltered minds could influence flowstone only through absolute concentration, or conversely by a massive outpouring of directed magic. Urza's effects came from the latter method. His magical skills got him started, and the infusion therapy he'd been taking boosted the available power for him to tap. Now, however, his method was at a dead end. All the natural magic power present on Rath wasn't enough to enable him to raise up a table or turn the floor to putty as Krovax did. Urza's candidacy was, in a word, doomed. The trick was to make certain he himself wasn't doomed along with it. He considered going to Krovax and abdicating his chance to become Evankar. Surely the relieved Krovax would spare him, maybe even allow him to depart Rath via the old Phyrexian portal in Portal Canyon? Of course. Krovax, such a kind, forgiving fellow. Urza shoved the remaining scrolls off the table. The small flowstone lamp overturned, and for a moment he feared it would start a fire among all loose manuscripts. The yellowish wick kept glowing inside the glass shield. There was no fuel as such in the lamp. Commanded to glow, it glowed. In time, the nanomachines in the lamp would break down, disintegrate, and the light would go out. It would take several hundred years at least. Urza put his head on the table and stared at the light. It reminded him of Belby. Bright, purposeful, untiring, and single-minded. What did she think of their solitary encounter? He tried to understand what it meant to him. Since he was a small boy, Urza's life had been centered on the practice of magic. For 19 years, it was the first thing he thought of in the morning and the thing he dreamt of at night. At Baron's Academy, he'd been too busy for romance. If something didn't advance his knowledge of magic, what use was it? He could laugh now at his own arrogance, except he didn't feel like laughing. With thumb and forefinger, he tried to pluck the glowing wick from the lamp. It winked out, throwing the cluttered room into darkness. He took his fingers away, and the element resumed glowing. No flame, no heat. More than ever, it reminded him of Belby. She had her own portal, she said. If so, she must go. Take him with her. As Urtai saw it, they had common cause to leave Rath together. Once Krovax was in power, no one on Rath was safe. Everyone be fodder for his appetite, his own private herd of two-legged cattle. As a defeated rival, Urtai's life was obviously in danger, and he could see Belby's would be too. Yes, Belby would be number 2 on Krovax's to-do list. Where to go? Dominaria? It was home, but very soon it'd be the scene of a horrible war. Gerard and the others had told him this, and Belby confirmed it. In their private moments, Belby explained how Rath and Dominaria would intermingle, the landscape of one becoming the part of the landscape of the other. Once the Rathy overlay was in place, the legions of Phyrexia would pour forth in all their awful technological efficiency, and life on Dominaria would either be enslaved or extinguished. Urtai considered himself a realist. Gerard, Hannah, and company couldn't prevail against the hosts of the Hidden One. He thought it possible once, but no longer. They'd be faced with an army of 100,000 Krovaxes, utterly ruthless and totally without mercy. His homeworld was doomed. Belby's portal could take them anywhere. There must be 1,000,000 worlds or more out there populating the void. Even the Phyrexians couldn't reach them all. Perhaps he could find some peaceful world of magic to inhabit, where machines were made of wood and didn't think, where floors existed only to be walked on, and a man and a woman of talent could live a good life together until time mingled their souls into the great firmament forever. Go out, he willed, and the lamp obeyed. Clouds were piling up in high black drifts over the stronghold as Eladamri and his team approached the foot on the main causeway. Tainel had gotten on their lone curl, as befitted his senior rank among the Rathy troops. Eladamri walked behind, his manacles tied to a long rope. Tainel looped the other end around his saddle ring. The causeway rose from the plain, a massive raised bridge of solid masonry. Usually busy, traffic up and down the road was today only a trickle. It soon became clear why. A heavy cordon of soldiers patrolled the end of the road, and guard posts along the bridge were fully manned. Tainel waved Civi and the others come forward. They lined up and stood at attention. Eladamri came alongside the Dahl corporal and got down on both knees, trying to look downtrodden. "Why all the soldiers?" Tainel asked. "They know what's up?" "No," said Eladamri, his head hanging low. "If they suspected us, they would have swooped down on us long ago. Something else amiss." "It can't hurt to ask," said Civi. "We're all one army, aren't we? We've been lost more than a week, so it won't be strange if we don't know what's going on." "True enough," said Eladamri, his head raised. "Look out, we've been seen." The buff-stone barbican at the end of the causeway was a small fortress in itself. A sentry, standing in the open arched doorway, spotted the rebels and hurriedly called his superior. A Rathy captain appeared, eating a bright blue pear. He shouted an order, inaudible from where Eladamri sat, and 40 soldiers poured out of the barbican fully armed. In ragged order, they ran at the waiting rebels. "Now's the time for cool heads," Eladamri said. "Remember, you're all Rathy soldiers. Those men coming are your comrades." The soldiers fanned out and circled the little band. Tainel leaned nonchalantly across the neck of his curl. Lynn Civi struck the stem of a long blade of grass in her teeth. The captain arrived, still clutching his half-eaten snack. "Who are you?" he said sharply. Tainel saluted. "Corporal Exki from the 4th Company. It's good to be home." The captain squinted at him. "4th Company, eh?" Tainel smiled. "That's right, the fearsome 4th. Not many of you fellows made it back." The captain extended a hand. "Welcome home." Tainel shook the man's hand with genuine relief. "We have a prisoner to turn in." The captain stood over Eladamri, hands on hips. "Why'd you bother?" I'd have cut his throat and left him on the plain. Civi stepped forward. Oh no, she said. We caught us an important rebel. This is Eladamri. The fruit fell from the captain's hands. Stuff me with stone! The rebel leader himself? Are you sure? That's who he says he is. Can't think why anyone would claim to be Eladamri unless he was. I mean, knowing what's going to happen to him, yeah? Tainel said. On your feet! The captain signaled his men to come forward and take the prisoner. Civi and the rebels closed around the elf, blocking the soldier. He's our prize, she said. We caught him. We'll take him in. The company burst out laughing. You're the fourth company, all right. Nobody else has such brass. He waved his men back. Come to the guardhouse. Give you a token now you get through the other stations. And I'll send a percher to Lord Greven with the news. Lord Greven hates perchers, Tainel said boldly. Send a runner instead. We're not in a hurry, and this elf ain't going anywhere without us. Flushed with excitement, Captain readily agreed. A runner was dispatched with the startling news of Eladamri's capture. The rebels strolled to the guardhouse amid the admiring looks of the Rathi soldiers. Eladamri dragged his feet and did his best to look dejected. The captain gave Tainel a pass, an engraved metal disc 4 inches wide with the Citadel seal on it. Tainel hung the cord around his neck and let the token fall across his chest. This is wonderful, said the captain. Tell me, how did you capture him? It was tough, Civi said. Our battalion charged through the burning camp when we saw this band of elves cross in front of us. We chased him into the swamp, losing half our number on the way. We killed 20 or 30 rebels, caught this one about to skewer himself. Trying to find our way out of the sky shroud, we got turned around in all the trees. The rest of the battalion was lost to potholes, snakes, and fever. We got out eventually, but the army had moved on, made our way back as best we could. The soldiers hung on Civi's every word. When she finished, they cheered lustily. Civi couldn't help but grin. This is the best news we had since Predator was repaired, said the captain. With their leader gone, the rebels won't have a stomach to face us again. Surrounded by waving, cheering troops, the team herded Eladamri forward. When the Barbican had fallen behind them, the elf spoke. Nice work, Tainel. Tainel grinned and nodded. Doing my best to sound like an insolent soldier. What about my performance? Civi asked. Splendid, said Eladamri. You have the gifts of a bard. He trudged on, his arms weighed down by the heavy shackles. It's one thing to fool common soldiers at the gate. Greven Vec will show up soon. So will Krovax for all we know. So keep your heads. Not worried, Tainel said. Once word gets around we're bringing in Eladamri, no one will look at us twice. And so it proved. At each guardhouse they passed, soldiers turned out to hail them, to stare at the captured rebel chief. Not all their looks were baleful, however. Many were simply curious to see the famed Eladamri, the elusive guerrilla leader who evaded them for so long. Popular rumor made Eladamri a wizard of elven magic, which accounted for his many miraculous escapes. It was disappointing for the legend lovers to see the fabled elf turn out to be slight, middle-aged fellow wearing rags. The runner must have had a busy tongue, because everyone they encountered along the causeway knew Eladamri was coming. Soldiers and civilians alike lined the bridge, and more arrived every minute. Civilians from the crater settlements came out to see the procession. The disguised rebels were almost overwhelmed by the hordes of curious Dahl and Vec who wanted to see Eladamri. Suddenly, the crowd in front of them melted away. Curl-mounted cavalry were cantering down the bridge with lances leveled. People scrambled to avoid the troopers. Behind them came a battalion of heavy infantry in tall, conical suits of armor. In their midst was Greven Vec, decked out in fearsome battle gear. Eladamri checked the faces of his young comrades. More than one rebel's face lost color at the sight of the towering warlord. Of all the rebels, Lyn Civi was the calmest. Hip out thrust, she casually rested her hand on the handle of her Totem Vec. Dreadlord, Tainel said, his voice cracking. Corporal Exki and men reporting for duty. We have a prisoner. The heavy infantry parted ranks, and Greven stepped out in front of them. So you do. He was a good 2 feet taller than the manacled elf, yet as they sized each other up, kind of equality existed between them. Not respect, but recognition that each was a formidable warrior. If you're not Eladamri, you should be, Greven said. You doubt it, Dreadlord? Said Civi. He eyed her as if she were an insect crawling along his dinner plate.
"Doubt keeps a soldier alive," he said. "You should cherish it as closely as your sword."
He said, "I am Eldamri, son of Kelminar. You gonna leave me standing here?" For a moment, a fleeting fragment of a second, he saw indecision on the other warrior's face. Then it was gone. Grevin gave his order.
"Deliver him to the Citadel guards on the factory concourse."
But Dreadlord, Tainel said, what happened to him?
"Is it any concern of yours, soldier?"
Yes, Dreadlord, Civi interjected. As his captors, we want a reward for taking him. Some of the civilians in the crowd gasped at her impertinence. The genuine Rathi soldiers listened for the telltale grinding of teeth, but none came.
"Everything you've earned will be yours. This is the word of Grevin Helvek."
He stood aside and let Tainel lead his team through. The dark, brooding bulk of the Stronghold lay ahead. Eldamri lifted his face to the sky, took what he had hoped was not his last look at the turbulent gray clouds of Rath. The tense atmosphere in the Citadel had reached an unbearable level. Every minute was like the hour before a storm, when all is still, but the threat of an upheaval is clearly in the air. Belby sensed things were about to break. She donned her close-fitting armor for the first time since the day of her arrival. To her logical mind, the danger came from the thousands of Dahl and Vec people living in the crater. These were the people Krovax had wronged by murdering their loved ones. Despite the relative calm of the past 2 days, Belby felt certain a revolution was bubbling just beneath the veneer of normality. Armored, with her helmet tucked under one arm and a slim Phyrexian sword on her hip, Belby went forth to find the other residents of the Citadel. She had little luck. Urtai was missing, probably buried in some forgotten library. Dorian Ildal was nowhere to be found. She went to his private chambers and found the door open. Dorian's rooms were a shambles, bedcloths were torn off the bed, broken pottery littered the floor, his chamber pots were full and reeking. When she emerged from Dorian's rooms, the hall was full of people, courtiers, some of whom she hadn't seen in a week, and members of the palace guard. Even off-duty guards in their padded jerkins were milling around in the corridor. Belby stopped an elderly doll. "What's happened?" she said.
"Tremendous news, Excellency," said the courtier. "They say the Elf Lord, Eldamri, has been taken. He'll be here in a minute."
Eldamri? Taken? If the man had told her Grevin had changed sex, she could not have been more surprised. How did it happen?
"I know not how the rascal was caught, only that he's coming here in chains."
He hurried away after bowing numerous times. Belby, a bit dazed, stood motionless in a river of moving, chattering people. Eldamri captured? The ordered tread of guards in formation awakened her. Turning, she ordered them to stop. 12 guards halted and their leader saluted.
"We have orders to convey the rebel Eldamri to the palace prison," the senior guard said. "We're to meet Lord Grevin on the factory concourse and take custody of the prisoner."
"I'm changing your orders," she said. "You will bring the prisoner to the convocation chambers. I want to see him." The captain of guards saluted again and continued on his way. Belby ascended the stairs to the convocation antechamber. At midday, she was scheduled to announce her choice for the next Evencar. In preparation for the ceremony, the antechamber had been polished and decorated with banners and martial flags. Guards in black enameled dress armor already stood by the iris doors. They presented arms when they saw her. "At ease," she said. "A state prisoner will be brought here shortly. You will admit him, his escort, and anyone that follows. Is that clear?"
"Shall be done, Excellency."
She stepped between them. The circular panels hissed apart. "Until then, admit no one," Belby added.
"Yes, Excellency."
The hall was decked out with a wide semicircle of crimson and gold banners, each one bearing the heraldic arms of the past Evencar. Each company of the Rathi army was represented by a battle flag. The governor's throne, stripped of Volrath's insignia, had been brought down from the upper throne room just for this occasion. Flanking the tall chairs were 2 flaming braziers. She walked slowly down the aisle, surrounded by symbols of Rath's past and present might. From the odor, she realized the flames she saw were real, not flowstone simulations. The braziers were the size of warrior shields mounted on black metal tripods. Her footsteps were loud in the stillness. She felt strangely numb. Belby mounted the shallow steps to the dais and sat down on the throne. Her back had just touched the rear of the seat when she heard a voice say,
"How does it feel?"
Krovax walked out of the shadows directly above her. "Don't you get tired of walking around upside down?"
An amusing trick of the flowstone. Sometimes useful,
he replied, walking down the wall.
but you didn't answer the question.
"It's a chair like any other." Krovax stepped down to the floor.
Not so. That's the seat of the Evancar of Rath, the sole arbiter of the lives of millions.
"I thought the power resided in the ruler, not the furniture."
You have so little appreciations of the trappings of power. Anyone who sits there, no matter how base, it's a taste of rulership. That doesn't happen with ordinary bar stools or kitchen chairs.
On Phyrexia, such trappings are unnecessary. Power comes from knowledge and control, not flags and furniture. My own master... Her voice trailed off as she remembered the formless mass of Abical Dro. He has no need for chairs. Krovax descended to the dais.
You're here early. Have you come to a decision?
Yes.
Care to share it with me?
Not yet.
Then why are you here, Excellency?
Haven't you heard? Eladamri's been captured. Grevin's bringing him here even as we speak. Krovax was electrified.
You jest! No, you never do! Adamri captured?
He clapped his hands and smiled broadly.
A fitting prize to begin my new era on Rath.
Noise swelled in the antechamber, and the iris doors scissored apart. Leading an enormous crowd was Grevin Ilvek, still clad in his battle armor. At his heels came 10 nondescript soldiers with muddy feet and battered, rusty armor. Next were the palace guards in a box formation, 4 abreast. In the center of the box walked a lone figure in gray rags, his hands bound by heavy chains. Courtiers in their Baroque finery filled the hall behind the guards, and a motley collection of off-duty soldiers, servants, and the odd Mog or two filled out the crowd. Belby craned to see the famous rebel leader, but with Grevin and a wall of guards in the way, she couldn't get a clear view of him. Grevin halted the procession. A few onlookers coughed nervously.
Your Excellency,
Grevin boomed.
the soldiers of the army of Rath bring you tribute.
He stepped to one side. Krovax stood at the foot of the throne, arms folded. He opened his mouth to speak, but his words were stillborn when Belby rose from the Evancar's throne and descended the steps. The hall grew deathly quiet. Her boots clicked on the mock marble floor. She felt as though she was confronting a great mystery, a lost wonder of nature. Tainel, Stivy, and the rebel raiders held their breath. They never imagined they would get so close to the seat of the enemy's power. The vast stronghold impressed them. The Flowstone factory puzzled and frightened them. Rank upon rank of tough professional soldiers worried them. Now, in the very heart of the citadel, they were face to face not only with Grevin Ilvek and Krovax, but the personal emissary of a dreaded Phyrexian overlords. She was a girl, a young elf girl.
These are the soldiers who brought in Aladamri,
Grevin explained. Tainel saluted with such force he almost knocked his own helmet off.
Corporal Exie of the 4th Company, Your Excellency.
Corporal?
This is my second, Private Vertino.
Stivy returned Belby's vacant look with an icy appraisal of her own. The rebels parted ranks to let Belby pass. When they were clear, she got a better glimpse of Eladamri. He was of moderate height, and the color of his hair meant he was past the prime of life for his race. The lofty palace guards, chosen from the ranks of the regular army for their size and strength, still prevented her from seeing him clearly. Grevin nodded, and a door of armored warriors drew back. Eladamri looked upon her face, and she on his. His eyes widened, and a rush of blood flamed in his cheeks. Eladamri let out a roar of perfect rage, and though weighed down with 30 pounds of shackles and chains, he threw himself on Belby and bore her to the floor. She thought time had stopped. Everyone was fixed like the statues in Volrath's suite. The guards, hampered by their ceremonial garb, the ragged soldiers who captured Eladamri, gaped. Krovax, hovering on the periphery of the scene, watched and smiled. Grevin, who always seemed on the knife's edge of violence, just looked on with curious passivity. They're going to let me die, she thought. They're going to let this madman kill me. Eladamri had both hands around her neck. Because of her gorget, he couldn't throttle her, so he raised her head and slammed it against the floor. It hurt, but only superficially. Her alloy skull could turn an axe blow. As it was, each time her head struck the floor, there was a dull metallic thud.
Assassin! Murderer!
The elf cried.
Avila! Avila!
The footsore soldiers of the 4th Company moved first. They grabbed Eladamri by the arms and shoulders and tore him off Belby. Once they acted, the spell was broken, and the palace guards quickly pinned the rebel leader to the floor with their polearms. Alexei and his comrades pushed away the guards' bills and axe heads, relying on their bodies to hold the raging Eladamri. Someone lifted Belby to her feet. Her vision cleared, and she saw her benefactor was Krovax.
I knew he was crafty, but I never thought Eladamri was insane.
Krovax said mildly.
Are you all right, Excellency?
Belby rubbed the back of her head. No permanent damage?
Damned murderers! They did it on purpose! Devils! Monsters! Dear Avila, sweet child, how could they do this?
Belby was still holding the back of her head.
What is he raving about?
Krovax and Grevin were clueless. You men, let him go, Belby commanded. Civi and Tenel hesitated but followed orders. Up, said Tenel, and the rebels scrambled to their feet. Eladamri arched his back and sprang into a crouching position with one flex. Tears streamed down his cheeks. With the second heave, he regained his feet. The palace guards interposed a wall of polearms between him and Belby. Hold, she said to the troops. Don't harm him. She turned to Eladamri. Why do you risk death to lay hands on me? Who is Avila? He advanced a step, breathing heavily. Does my face mean nothing to you? I've never seen you before. He gripped the polearm shafts bearing his path. Where do you come from, girl? Grevin backhanded Eladamri, sending him sprawling. The crowd let out a collective, "Oh!"
You do not question the emissary,
Grevin barked. Belby held up a hand to the hulking warrior. Be still, she said. She pushed through the hedge of polearms and knelt beside the elf. Eladamri pushed himself up on one arm and dabbed the blood from his freshly split lip. Do you attack me because I'm the emissary of your enemy? Said Belby.
I attacked you because you're an abomination. A horrible lie,
Eladamri said in a low voice.
You should be exterminated, as all unnatural creatures should be.
I wouldn't speak too lightly of extermination.
Krovax said, shouldering through the press.
From where I stand, the best candidate for extermination is you.
Eladamri stood. He was weighed down by his chains, but when Belby tried to assist him, he pulled away from her, glaring hatefully. Remove his shackles, Belby said. When no one complied with her order, she shouted, Do as I say! Tenel shoved the key in his leader's bonds. He tried to urge Eladamri to be calm with a meaningful glance. The elf did not meet his eyes. He burned holes in Belby, and kept doing so even after his chains fell loudly to the floor.
What are your orders, Excellency?
Grevin asked. What is the first task of a captor? He bowed.
As you command, Excellency.
At Grevin's orders, the box of guards was reformed. Tainel and the rebels kept discreetly to the rear. Don't kill him, Belby added as the prisoner faced about. Find out what he knows. Or preserve his life. Do you understand? Grevin avowed he did. Krovax sighed.
So much trouble. I doubt he'll tell us anything. Better to strike off his head now and be done with it. I can have the airship drop it on the rebels and Sky Shroud for it.
Shut up! Belby commanded. Krovax shrugged. The massive crowd tried to get out of the way of Eladamri's escort. But there were so many packed in the rear of the hall that it took a few minutes to clear the doorway. Just as everyone's attention was focused on the departing rebel leader, the floor of the hall turned to soft clay, and the dilating doors melded into a solid mass. Everyone was lifting their feet, losing shoes and slippers in the sticky stuff. Belby's frustration was written on her face. What are you doing, Krovax? Restore the door and floor. Krovax was seated on the throne. He looked very natural and comfortable in the tall black chair. Leaning back, he propped his chin on his hands and waited until everyone was looking at him to respond.
The noon hour is not far off, Excellency. Why not take advantage of these splendid witnesses and announce your choice for the next Evankar of Rath?
She looked around. Urtai is not here.
Should he be?
He's under consideration for the post. Krovax flexed his fingers. 4 flowstone rods, like the ones he used to slaughter the hostages, erupted from the floor around Belby. Secondary spikes jutted from the foot-thick shafts, isolating her in a ring of artificial thorns. Belby glared. I tire of your displays. Her right eyelid twitched. A 5th rod formed between her feet. It rose slowly to knee level and held there, the tip bending backward to caress her leg like some inquisitive tentacle.
Name your choice.
Krovax said quietly. Not yet. The 5th rod leaped up to her chin. Limp pseudopodia emerged from it, and delicately probed the joints of her armor. She knew that with a single thought he could convert them to steel-hard spikes. If you kill me, you'll never be named Evankar, Belby said. Knowing that, do you think you can frighten me into a decision? Krovax burst out laughing. It was hard, unfriendly mirth. The cage of spikes sank into the floor. The rest of the crowd found their footing had firmed up. Their exodus accelerated now that many of them had seen Krovax's talent for the first time. I defer my decision until tomorrow morning. By then I will know more about the rebels' plans and can act accordingly. With that, Belby strolled from the hall. Eladamri's eyes hatefully followed her out of the room.